Bezier. This is the most generalized curve and therefore the most useful. It has a last op panel where we can set its radius, which effectively is its size. A line determines which set of axes it is orientated to, while location specifies its position in 3D space, and rotation sets its rotation about each axis. As we describe the use of the Bezier curve in more detail, be aware that much of what follows is also relevant to other curve types. When we first create a Bezier curve, or indeed any curve, it will lie on the XY plane and can be quite difficult to see in the 3D viewport, particularly when it is not selected. To help, we can go to the Properties Editor's data page and adjust the bevel depth setting to give the curve some thickness. Now you may notice that the curve seems to be made up of straight elements rather than show as a smooth, continuous curve. This is a result of how it is displayed and not a problem with the curve itself. We can fix the display by adjusting the Resolution Preview U value to around 35. These are the only two values on this page that we'll look at for the moment. The next video will cover the remaining parameters in detail. When working in object mode, we are restricted to the usual move, rotate, and scale options. Note that all curves, like meshes, have an origin. When we enter Edit mode, the Bezier curve displays control points at each end of the curve, and each control point has two handles. The visibility of the handles is controlled by fields in the Curve Edit Mode Overlays panel. In the field labeled Handles, None hides all handles, Selected shows only the handles of the currently selected control point, and All shows all handles, with non-selected ones being less bright. We can also press H to hide both the selected control point and its handles. If all control points on a curve are selected, pressing H also hides the curve itself. Pressing Shift-H will usually hide non-selected control points and their handles, but has no effect if none of the control points are currently selected. Both H and Shift-H have a last op panel containing a checkbox labeled Unselected, and in effect both keyboard options are executing the same Blender command, but with the checkbox unchecked when pressing H and checked when pressing Shift-H. Pressing Alt-H will display all hidden elements. Returning to the Curve Overlays panel, there's an option to display the normals of a curve. We'll discuss the importance of the curve normals in a later video. If we select a single control point, press G, and move the mouse, this relocates that end of the curve and thereby reshapes the curve. A faster option than G is to change to the Tweak Select option in the toolbar, so we can select and move in one operation. If we select the end point of a handle and move the mouse, we reshape the curve without moving the curve's endpoint. Control points and handles can also be rotated and scaled, all of which influence the shape of the curve. Notice when we perform an operation on one handle, the other handle of the pair is also affected. By pressing the E key, we can also extrude the curve, adding a new segment with its own control point and handles. It is possible to extrude from an internal control point as well as those on the ends of the curve, but this always adds a curve in the shape of a figure of 8. There are different types of handles available. If we select a control point and press V, a pop-up menu will display the handle options available. Free handles show in an orange-yellow color. Each handle can be moved independently. Aligned handles show in green, and the two handles of a control point always form a single straight line. Adjusting one of the handles automatically affects the other. This is the default handle type when we first create a Bezier curve. Vector handles point directly to the previous and next control point. If we move a control point a handle is directed at, the handle automatically moves. Vector handles are colored deep blue. If we move a vector handle, Blender changes them to free handles. Automatic. These handles have their orientation adjusted automatically by Blender to create a smooth curve. Automatic handles are displayed in red. If we try moving the handle points, Blender will automatically change these to an aligned handle type. While we normally click on a control point before selecting a new handle type, by clicking on a handle, we can restrict change of type to that single handle only. Choosing the final option in the menu, Toggle Free Align, switches free handles to align ones, and vice versa. Many of the keyboard shortcuts we saw when editing meshes also work with curves. For example, we can create a closed loop by selecting the two endpoints and pressing F. Or we can take two control points within the curve, right-click, and choose Subdivide to add a new control point in the middle. Pressing A will select all the control points and their handles, and Alt-A will deselect them. Using Shift-D, we can also copy the selected section of a curve. The newly created part remains within the original object. And we can delete all or part of a curve using the X key. Deletion offers three options. Vertices deletes the selected control points, but leaves their influence on the curve, minimizing the change to that part of the curve between the deleted points. Segments deletes the section of the curve, but leaves the control points at either end of the selected part. This means that we end up with two separate curves, although they both remain parts of the original object. Dissolve vertices removes the selected control points and their influence on the curve, creating a larger change to the curve's profile than the vertices option. The next curve type is circle, and this is really a specialized form of a Bezier curve. And although it may start out as a circle when we enter edit mode, we can use all the editing options we saw already with the standard Bezier curve. NURBS. This is an acronym and stands for Non-Uniform Rational B-Splines. And although most of us will be none the wiser for knowing that, these curves do have a few advantages over Bezier curves in some situations, which we need not worry about at this point. Although NURBS have control points, these lie around the curve rather than on it, as is the case with Bezier curves. Also, NURBS do not have handles. However, all the keyboard options we used with Bezier curves, such as A, E, and F, as well as subdivision, also work on NURBS. Each NURBS control point can be assigned a weight value, and this affects the curvature in that area. To define a weight value, press N to display the sidebar. On the item page, adjust the W value, not the weight value, to create the required effect. NURBS circle is another circle option, but mathematically at least is a perfect circle, while the Bezier circle is a very close approximation to a circle. Path is another NURBS curve, but its primary purpose is to define a path that we want some other object to follow. Usually this is when creating an animation, but it can also be used to define a path for duplicated objects. The empty hair and fur options will be covered in future videos.